I will.
Everyone will unmute their microphones.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the
of the United States
States of America,
and to the
and to
republic
the republic
for which it stands,
which stands
one nation,
one nation,
God,
under God, indivisible,
with justice for all.
Justice for all. Okay, thank you for that. I honestly had the debate in my mind of whether or not we should all unmute for that. It's a real virtual problem. Okay, Jane, will you please take roll call for us?
I will. Madam President Galbraith,
Present.
Vice President Morgan,
Present.
Secretary Scott,
present.
I see you. Board Member Cullen,
Present.
Board Member Coleman.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So I hope everyone's doing well. We're still all virtual. This has been quite interesting going through our board meetings this way, but I think it's good for us. First, we'd like to have Dr. Cleveland. She wanted to give some introductory comments, and so I want to turn some time to her to give those comments.
Okay. I just wanted to let you know that we have been meeting very regularly with the Public Ed Department and LFC, Legislative Finance Committee representative, and LESC representative. The topics of conversation have been really focused around several things, and so all of those are going to be pretty important items. As you are all very much aware, the budget we will be submitting is not the actual budget we will be using for this school year. There's still certainly no clear understanding of what the percentage reduction will be. We know there will be some reduction. What we also know is the greater reduction will occur not this year, but this coming school year, but the following one. And so that drives a lot of the conversation as well. All the numbers that we hear floating around, we've been told that all it is discussion, and there has been nothing finalized, and nothing will be finalized until the special session. And Chris may be able to give us what he has heard about the special session. What we have heard is it could be any time from June through September. And for us, the sooner the better. What's delaying it are two things. One is getting a consensus before the session is actually called, so that they don't take the time and money and put people at risk. The other is there's just so many variables that are unknown right now that it's just kind of hard to know where to go with that. The other discussions are more practical. One is, what does summer activities look like? Right now, we've basically been told that for June, there probably will not be any activities. And then we'll kind of see where the governor's executive orders go and what the coronavirus cases look like a little bit later. The biggest discussion in the last couple of days has focused around the CARES funding, which is federal dollars that will be coming to New Mexico. They have told us that 90% of that money will flow on to the districts, which is a high percentage, more so than in the past. And so we're really pretty excited about that. They talked about the delivery system and how that money would get to us. And they're basically using the Title I delivery system from the federal government. It does not mean that it is Title I money, and it doesn't mean it has to be used for Title I. It means that it just simply will come through that avenue to the individual school districts. And the money is actually here. It's what we've heard. They're now working on the distribution of that funding. That will help us with some of the expenses that we have had since March, the date that it officially kind of starts, in which you could look at expenses related to CARES funding, was March the 13th, and that's the official beginning of our shutdown in the state. Then my last comment is just a general one too. much of the conversation now is shifting away, not that the budget issue has been resolved, because it's not, but it's now shifting away to talking about the reopening of schools and what that will look like. And so the conversations about that, I think the only consensus we have right now is it's not going to look in the fall like it does most falls. There will have to be considerable adjustments made. One of the things that's been talked about is the social distancing, and they do not expect that requirement to go away come the start of the school year. So we've been looking at several different approaches, and the Secretary Stewart said that New Mexico and his team are talking with other states to see how they're going to go about delivering instruction in the fall. But I think the one message is pretty clear, is it will look very different than the start of school has for years past. And so we're already beginning our research, and we're already beginning our discussions about what the reopening of school might look like, and starting to just brainstorm about what might be some of our options. So just wanted to give you a brief overview over what the discussions are looking like across the state right now. As I think I've shared, there's 8 of us that are working as a subcommittee with the Secretary to provide some input, and we have appreciated that input, an opportunity to give that. They are getting it from other organizations as well, certainly school boards, looking to the business community, looking to the parent community. We certainly are not the only ones that are being asked to provide that input, but we have definitely appreciated it. We've had 3 meetings in the last week, and at least we're having some good discussions about what our future might look like in the state of New Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cleveland. And we really appreciate all that you've been, getting out there and trying to make sure that we are well prepared for the fall. So thank you for doing that and keeping those communication lines open for us. Okay. We are now going to move on to item E, to approve the prioritized agenda and proposed time allocations. Are there any comments or concerns on the prioritized agenda as it is? Do I have a motion to approve the prioritized agenda?
I make a motion to approve the prioritized agenda.
Okay, a motion by Jeffrey Morgan. Go ahead.
This is Board Member Cullen, and I second.
I'm sorry, we need to do that. Okay.
Thank you. It's okay. We do have our names on there, and I am stating your name, so we're covered in lots of ways. I think we're doing okay. Thank you. And a second by Board Member Cullen. Jane, can you please take a roll call vote for us on that?
I will. This is a yes/no call, roll call. Madam President Galbraith,
Yes.
Vice President Morgan,
Yes.
Secretary Scott,
Yes.
thank you. Board Member Cullen,
Yes.
Board Member Coleman,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you, everyone. Okay. I always check and make sure my microphone's on. Jane, do we have any public comment today?
We do not.
Okay. And I want to make sure I state this every time in case we have people listening in. If the public does wish to give comment, please call us. You can call us at 505-896-0667 between 9 and 3 to give comment. You can also go onto our website and email us your comments that we will read here in our meetings as we are doing them virtually. But I want to make sure the public is well aware that they're able to give any public comment they would like to at this time. Okay, moving on to reports. Item G. So we have Chris Balzano here to look over our 2020 legislative session. Go ahead, Mr. Balzano.
Good evening, members of the board, President Galbraith and Superintendent Dr. Cleveland. I'm so happy to be before you through a video conference. We didn't have the chance to do that right after the session, but I'm glad to give you a brief report of what happened through the session, what did we do, and where we are heading to during this COVID-19 and special session coming up. And please, what we're gonna do here, we're gonna go through this report, and then in the end, if you have any questions or comments, I can answer any specific questions. And as always, feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any other questions after this presentation. So with you, after the session, I sent to the board a package, and this package, it is 3 documents, PDF documents. One was the summary report, which you kind of have an idea on, the total amount of bills that we tracked for the school district. And that was about 150 pieces of legislation. From that, 137 were actually bills, 9 memorials, 3 joint memorials, and 4 joint resolutions. And in that report, you will see a synopsis of each bill, what exactly, a brief, give you like an idea what it is. And again, if you have any questions about it, we can always talk later about any of those. There's another document that was in your package that was sent, and that is the summary of the total appropriation when it comes to capital outlay and appropriated from the state government to the district. And as you know, we did receive the cybersecurity appropriation of $441,000. We did receive the fire alarm upgrades. The nurse office was vetoed, and you see the list of the ones there vetoed as well. You have a direct hyperlink where you can click and you can see the reason why it was vetoed on the record. But I can tell you that anything that was, below $150,000, it was vetoed by the governor. When I was reading the bill, going through the bill, that was really clear on everything that she vetoed there. And the only appropriation that we actually received was the cybersecurity district. So that is there, but keep in mind with things changing because of the COVID-19 and how it impacts the economy, the state budget, there are discussions of reversing capital outlay project funds and appropriations in general as well. So they're all looking into that. That's one of the items of discussion. What can be reversed when it comes to capital outlay, raises, and so on, anything that was set by the state government to school districts and agencies, right? But that's, and the next document it was just a letter kind of just summarizing, the whole work itself of the session. And you can see there and kind of have an idea that, the legislature sent, we had about 900 pieces of legislation introduced in the House and the Senate, and about over 80 bills actually got to the governor's desk. They kind of give you an idea on statistics and numbers and the work that takes to get, a bill at the governor's desk. Going back to the slide, the main slide.
I think Jane's pulling it back up.
There you go. Thank you, Jane. And as you know, the 30-day session is a session focused on only on the state budget, taxes, but we do see legislation that are not related to the subject matter. And we are seeing that more often, being more often accepted on coming with, and a bill that needs to be germane, has to be on a call of the governor and what the subject can be germane on that. and we see, legislators filing different kinds of bills with different subjects, and bringing, hey, is this can be germane or not because another bill was germane with the same subject. So you see from all kinds of subject matter besides actually taxes or budgetary nature when it comes to the legislation. So it's been very common to see that more often in the last few years. And it's something that we need to always watch in a 30-day session. That it's not, I won't say it's not anymore, only budget is going to get to the governor's desk. And you're going to see that throughout this presentation, that we did have a few bills that arrived to the governor's desk that are not really budgetary related, but they made it to that. So we saw, when it comes to school and school districts, the big discussions were related, again, the school budget, infrastructure for school districts. We had talks about education technology fund, trying to revive that and bring that back in. Behavioral health, mental health, the ERB contribution for retire and return to work with substitute teachers, which was an issue that we worked really hard in the previous session to stop. And we were there, like actually the only ones telling them, listen, this is wrong and this is why. And now this session, we were able to work and with Mimi Stewart, Senator Stewart, and make that change. So that was made it. If you can go like the next slide, please, Jen. Thank you. We talk about that, a little bit of the statistics on the bills. Keep going. Next. So we worked on, this is one of the bills that we supported, and SB 111, the education and retirement, that was a big one that we worked on. We have the credit for transfer students, SB 184, law enforcement officers at school. That was another piece of legislation that on the previous session, we were working with a few legislatures and making some changes in language so that, it works for us in the best way as possible. We did have a memorial on school cybersecurity issues. The memorial was passed on the House side. Senator Padilla is working with us for this interim to make sure that during the interim we actually get together and have a discussion with the Legislative Education Study Committee and what we need to do really to fund infrastructure on cybersecurity for school districts in general and statewide. But Rancho Public School took the lead on that with Senator Padilla and working with the memorial. Let's go to the next slide. So I want to make sure that we understand this slide here so there is no any miscommunication, misinformation. We are not against increase teacher salaries. Just want to make sure that it is clarified here. That was a bill that was introduced, but it was unfunded, and that can hurt the school district and also had poor language and certain parts of the bill. So we work on stopping that piece of legislation because it was something that it would be detrimental to the school district. So we joined with other school districts on working on that. That's SB 110 and House Bill 364 are the same piece of legislation. This piece of legislation, what happened was one got stopped, it died, and then on the last day of the day before the session, another one was filed in the other chamber and passed. It was a bill that it was sponsored by the governor. The only reason why we were really opposing It was not in nature because of the bill itself and what it does. We, together with our partners, we did request to sit down and actually have a conversation and have our input, and we didn't have the time to do that, and that's what we really wanted. And then again, go back to what's the purpose and the nature of a 30-day session, right? So we saw this bill coming in, and we're like, wait a minute, why not wait until interim so we all together, all stakeholders, can actually have an input and how this can be detrimental, how this can be good, and how we can work together and actually make changes. And we didn't have enough time to do that. And that was the reason why we stand in opposition of that bill. Next slide, please. Again, with the capital outlay and the package that was sent to you after the session has the details of the total amount, the hyperlink, so you can click on that and send you directly, you can see in the bill, and also the message of the governor on why the reason why she vetoed, and then you can see the ones that we actually received. Next slide, please. This is something that I felt that was important to put in a slide. SB 48 was something that was of concern on the previous session when it passed. Maybe something that you can think about it because it does cost the district money on to do the mandate of what this piece of legislation does. And it's something that we can think about it, perhaps working with Senator Stewart for the next session, a 60-day session, to make a few changes. We did discuss that with Senator Stewart, and she is open to the idea of, talk to her and see, how we can make some changes and actually come with an appropriation to help us and change some language in statute so that what the intent of the bill is, it can be done in a manner that is safe for employees, but also it is funding coming in. So it's just something that I wanted to put there. SB 48 from the past session. That bill passed because it wasn't a rocket docket, so we had no control. We just put it in and went straight to the governor, and with other bills as well, and passed. So. But it's something that through the session, we approached Senator Stewart, and she's open to have a discussion and how we can work with this. And perhaps, depending how things go during the interim, we can discuss that during the interim committee as well. Next slide, please. Go ahead, next. All right, so special session. I think Dr. Cleveland already gave a little bit of background there on what is happening from the PED side and Senate and the Legislative Finance Committee. I'm going to be talking a little bit more and just filling in and what we have up to today. So, as you know, our economy is heavily dependable on oil, GRT. And I don't know as today what the barrel of the oil is, but that's something that the budget that was created was based on the barrel at $50, I believe, and that's not where we are right now, right? So there is a need to get back and revise the budget, right? The House Bill 2, and see, okay, how are we going to balance the budget? So should we do this by the end of the fiscal year, or should we wait until September to do that? That way we give time for the federal government to figure out if there is any stimulus, any help from their side, and also give us time to see if the barrel of oil does increase in price and things get more stable, and we can have a big picture of what we need to do. The problem with that is agencies and school districts need to know what do they have to work with. And it's been advised that, hey, let's do a special session, mid to end of June, before the end of fiscal year, to see where we are, to give the school districts and other agencies what they have to work with. And then after that, we do another session in September where we can take a look and what came from the federal government, and also in the GRT and the oil price, and then make any changes that is needed. So it'll be something where, they would meet for 2 days, and then in September meet again for 2 days. So that's the discussion that is happening right now between leadership, Senate Finance, and governor's office, because it's too early at this moment to actually call a special session, because really they don't have the numbers yet on GRT and on the oil prices. So it's for not having that accurate number, it's difficult to come up. So a majority of legislatures feel that it would be a waste of funding that we already don't have, money that we're going to have to get together and do a special session at this moment. So as close as possible in the fiscal year, the better it is. And we don't know exactly, if with the COVID-19, there's another discussion of perhaps as the weather gets warmer, have the discussion, the COVID-19 might go away and we don't gonna have that. And then we can actually hold a session, had discussions about holding a session virtually, but that is not really a welcome idea by the leadership and the legislature. And also it's not a welcome idea by those who retain lobbyists to represent their interests in the Capitol. I had another client that told me, I don't want legislatures to close their doors by themselves with no representation, from general public or lobbyists there, and then they are just making their laws. So, and some legislatures are not welcome the idea either. And there is a process, and how do we make sure that that process is done, in a way that is safe and with the safety requirements or restraints that were set by the governor. Some of those would have to be uplifted. That way, people can meet. There are more than 5 people in the room. So there is a lot of unknown on that. So that's another reason why they're like, okay, let's wait until mid-end of June, and then we can announce special session. Some people are saying June 8th, other people are saying June 15th. I have heard, last week of June. So there is a lot of discussion on what dates. I think that in the beginning of June, we will have an idea on, okay, this is the date for the special session. And by then, I can see the state doing 2 sessions. Again, one and before the fiscal year ends, and another one after, so that the changes can be made. Those discussions at the beginning were, okay, where are we going to cut money? They talk about GRT. They talk about tax code changes. They talk about cash balances with school districts. I know that Stan Rounds is working with the school districts and with the PED. Hey, let's not go there. That's not where we're going to go. There is other pockets of money that were not used throughout the school year that, you guys can take it back. There is discussion also where the governor would go back to the capital outlay bill and reverse some of those appropriations. Perhaps as well, government employees raised that would be reversed as well. So they're discussing. There is nothing written in stone yet, but they're trying to take a look on everything. Let's go next slide. Next. All right. So, what I invite the board to take the time this year and work together. We work together on creating our priority for 2021 legislative session. So, by why we do that now? We do that now so that way during the interim we are working so that bills and memorials, resolutions, appropriations, capital outlay, all that can be discussed during the session. So with that, I'll leave you guys if you have any questions or any comments that we can discuss in particular. But that's pretty much my presentation.
Thank you so much for that. We appreciate all the information, the detailed information that you've sent us with all of this stuff. It's been really helpful to go through. So thank you for sending all that. I'm going to open it up for questions. I'll go through and call your name for board members who would like to each give, ask questions or any comments. And we'll start, let's start with board member Coleman today.
No, I'm good. Thank you, Chris, for putting this together.
Okay, thank you. Jeffrey Morgan, would you like to have any questions or comments?
No questions, but comments. Just want to say thanks for all the work you do. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Noreen Scott, any questions or comments?
No, I have no questions. Thank you, Chris, for the good presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then one more, Catherine Collin, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, thank you, Chris. This is Board Member Cullen. So, Chris, I just want to make sure that, and it seemed like you explained it towards the end. So that diabetes bill was from the previous session, not this last session, correct? This is the one that went through the rocket docket. There wasn't something else that.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
I thought about that because I remember you bringing that up, and we discussed briefly in my report last year, and it was something that, hey, let's bring that back after the 30-day session, that we can work that on a 6-day session if it's still a problem for the school district and if the board decides that can be. So that's why I thought, hey, remember, just have a reminder there. Take a look on this. If any of you need an analysis, on this bill to try to understand better, I'll be more than happy to do that and send that to you guys as well. But as things has changed, and we know, like Dr. Cleveland was talking about how the budget will be changing for this year and next year, we might have to, be looking at other things for the upcoming session. We don't know yet, but I thought that should bring that up because that was something that you brought up with the board and requested from us. So I want to just remind you guys on that.
Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure it wasn't, she didn't put something else in there. So, and then as far as the capital outlay, we know that'll most likely probably go away, but I know that we had the cybersecurity and then a partial of the fire alarm, and it looked like it was only 25,000 of the 4 million. Is that correct for the fire alarm?
Correct.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I had that right. Okay, and then I just think for the priorities that I was thinking is, obviously what Stan Rounds is working on, and I know our district is working on with you, is the cash sweeps. That's a major concern because that's what we had happen last time. So as long as we keep reiterating, we do need to keep our cash available for our projects that we're looking at. So, but thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And then Dr. Cleveland, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, yes, I would. I want to just share a couple of things. We, they're still talking about salaries, and the unions are still hoping for some salary adjustment. What seems to be the conversation right now is seeing if there's some way not to either raise the health insurance by 8% or ask them to roll it back. I don't think rolling it back is going to happen given all the costs of COVID-19. I think that seems pretty unrealistic to me. But there is some conversation about not asking people to take less. I think that, on the other hand, I think there's just the conversation about how many people are out of work and how many people are dealing with unemployment and the realities of that. And so, that's what we're hearing is there's still some discussion about insurance. And of course, they'll discuss the issue of salaries. The other conversation that's going on a lot right now is going back to what is it that we absolutely have to have? What are the things we have to have? And do we have, and there's a lot of hard conversation going on with that, but do we have to have extended learning? Do we have to have K-5 plus? Do we need to do the adoption this year? And so trying to have a conversation about what is the most important priorities and preserving that and having a good 9 months rather than having maybe a 12-month kind of activities that might result in some major losses for the district. When you cut funds, the way we have traditionally done it, most districts in New Mexico, is we cut personnel or we reduce salaries, which we've not done either one of those, or we've increased class sizes, which we've done plenty. And so one of the challenges this time will be we're not going to be able to increase class sizes this time. I don't think the state's going to approve it, but for the health reason, we're not going to be able probably to put a full class in a classroom if this continues. And so I have to look at a lot of different options, but I think the one that would be the most problematic this time is increasing class sizes. I don't think that's going to be a possibility given the other. And then I hope they're telling us the truth. So let me tell you, I hope they're telling us the truth. But we've been told by both LFC and LESC, most recently Rachel Gudgel yesterday morning with this group, that they are not looking at taking cash balances. And we also heard that from the secretary that that's not the intent is to do it. But we all know that when there's huge deficits and hard times come, sometimes your hopes and aspirations just don't happen. And so to Board Member Cullen's point, I think we need to keep our eye on that and continue to monitor that. We've approached both LESC and LFC with regards to Joe Harris, and I think I've shared that with you before. And they say that that's the kind of money that should be in a fund balance that should be protected. And so we're in the process of seeing what do we need to do to ensure that if that were to come, that money would not be counted in our cash reserve and would be set aside in an escrow kind of account that would protect it. Both LFC and LESC in our conversations with their executive directors both say that they do support and understand why that school needs to be open and how difficult it would be for the community and the use of taxpayer money to have a school that would not open. So they have assured us that they will work with us in trying to address that extra money that we have in for a very specific purpose. And interestingly enough, we were told several years ago by LFC we should be saving for school openings, and that's exactly what we did. So we certainly don't want to be penalized for that. But we're told right now that cash sweeps are off the table. They're not looking at that. It's not being considered. But we all know that sometimes things change, and even with the best of intentions, things do change. So, but our priorities, as I know the board looks at that over the next few months. I think, really looking at how we protect our program and our people, I hope will be the priority of the board. One of my last comment on that is if you don't protect your people, and then when better times come, you don't find them. And what occurred in the state of New Mexico, which you are very, very much were eyewitnesses to, is after the Great Recession, we lost so many teachers out of New Mexico, and they left. And when better times rolled around, they were nowhere to be found. And so we had huge teacher shortages in our state. And so we're hoping that we can hang on to the people we have in order to be able to hopefully survive this over the next several years. Probably it will take us do that. And then in addition to that, as we've had a pretty clear communication from the secretary that wanting us to protect our staff and our employees should be a high priority. And some of that is obviously really caring about those people. Absolutely. I think there's also the other issue of when people go on unemployment, that costs the state too. And that unemployment, people aren't working and they lose their health insurance. In some cases they don't. But you don't get anything for it. And when people stay on the payroll, they're getting paid, but they're certainly doing work for which they are being paid. So the attempt to not move people off into unemployment, probably not much of a savings for the state of New Mexico. So, certainly those are just things to be thinking about for the future, but certainly trying to maintain we have a wonderful staff in Rio Rancho, and really wanting to maintain that staff to the greatest degree possible. It's a very high priority because in education, as you all know, program is delivered by people. And so if you don't have good people, it's really hard to be able to deliver a good program. And so that's, I think that's the state's thinking as well. So priorities, I hope, will be to maintain the most important programs and our people.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Cleveland, for that. And I think we all agree we have great teachers and great staff, and we want to make sure that we can keep them. So thank you. And thank you, Mr. Balzano, for your presentation. Anyone, just to raise a hand, anything else anyone has before we move on? You can. Okay. All right. Thank you again. We appreciate you coming out and everything that you do for us, our district. We really do appreciate it. So thanks.
Thank you, President.
Yes, I had
There is one. Go ahead, Noreen. Thanks. I don't know. Did you have a question, Noreen? Scott?
You may be muted.
no, I did not.
Oh, okay. Okay. I think we just were hearing something else. All right. So thank you. We appreciate it. And thanks for everything you do. All right. We will move on to approving our consent agenda. Are there any comments or concerns with the consent agenda that anyone would like to give? I'm just looking at your frames, so okay. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as it is?
So moved.
I have a motion by Noreen Scott. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Jeffrey Morgan. And Jane, can you take a roll call for us on this?
Yes, I will. Madam President Galbraith,
Yes.
Vice President Morgan,
Yes.
Secretary Scott,
Yes.
Board Member Cullen,
Yes.
Board Member Coleman.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Motion carries 5-0. We will move to our business portion of our meeting with business item A. The Board of Education met in a closed executive session on April 30th, 2020 at 4:30 p.m. as permitted under Section 10-15-1 H7 and H8 of the New Mexico Open Meetings Act. The matters discussed in the closed meeting were limited only to those specified in the notice for closure. Moving on to item B, we will be considering the approval of the April 13th, 2020 unapproved board minutes. Are there any comments or concerns with those minutes? Just raise your hand in your thing if you have anything. Okay. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Motion by Noreen Scott and a second.
This board member,
My second.
I have multiple second. I'm going to go with the second by board member Cullen because I was looking at her picture on the screen.
Okay.
So, thank you. Jane, can you take a roll call on this?
Yes, I will. President Galbraith?
Yes.
Vice President Morgan?
Yes.
Secretary Scott?
Yes,
Board Member Cullen?
Yes.
Board Member Coleman?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, motion carries 5-0. And also, I just wanted to say thank you to Jane. I went through those minutes, and she really tried to capture the meeting, and I appreciate her doing that. So, item C: consider approval to purchase plaques for all 3 NMSBA scholarship nominees in recognition of their accomplishments. And our presenter on this will be Catherine Cullen.
And I apologize. I'm just scrolling around. I didn't have the agenda right in front of me. So we had done those nominations for those 3 students to to present to the New Mexico School Board Association. And it was a really tough decision for all of us. And I thought that the board might want to recognize those 3 students that had been submitted as nominations. And Beth and I kind of got to talking about, because we had those paper certificates, but then I thought that maybe we would like to go ahead and get a plaque for them on behalf of the board. And one thing is, Lauren, are you there online in the meeting?
Yes.
Is Lauren here?
he's here.
I'm here.
My question was, and I had addressed this to Jane, was she able to talk to you if we could do that out of the funds, or we would have to do it through donations?
A plaque that's a recognition for a student is something that the Attorney General's opinion on what's an acceptable expenditure for an educational institution, that's one of the acceptable uses of funds.
Okay.
Obviously, it has to be reasonable, but yeah, that's acceptable.
Okay, so I just wanted to verify that if we need to do it through donations or if we could use those board funds. So that was something that I was proposing, and I just wanted to kind of open it up for conversation, what you guys' thoughts are on that. I mean, it was a difficult choice, but one thing that I kind of try to get implemented is when we used to do quite a bit of recognitions over the years. Dr. Cleveland, I remember we used to give something to them when they would come to the board meeting. Then unfortunately we was unable to for a time. So then we started I implemented giving the certificates to them. But this is something where Beth and I were talking about some plaques. So I just kind of want to open up with your thoughts.
Thank you, Catherine. Board Member Coleman, would you like to give your thoughts on that?
Board Member Cullen, could you just explain what you envision the plaque saying or acknowledging?
And Beth, kind of when, are you there, Beth? I
Yes,
see you.
I'm here.
I see your name.
Yes.
I know when we were talking about kind of the plaques or what we could put on there, and we were talking about the place that does plaques. So I'm not sure what the cost is and how much it would be to be putting something on there for them.
Right. We could they've been closed, so they haven't been in. Yeah. So we'd have to wait till they reopen. But generally it's not anything that's terribly expensive. I mean, you're talking less than $100 per plaque at the most, and that would be a really fancy. Yeah.
And we could just put something that the board honors them.
Yep. In recognition of your nomination for the New Mexico School Boards Association or something, the board wants to recognize you for your achievements or whatnot. Yep. We could put something together and get the board a draft to review.
Because that was something kind of we want to be able to recognize some of these students as a board.
Right.
I think this is Board Member Coleman, and with everything that's going on with these seniors, I think that would be a really nice thing to do.
I agree. Okay.
This is Board Member Scott. I think it's a great idea.
And Jeffrey Morgan, would you like to give any comments, concerns?
I'm on board. I think it's a great idea. Yeah.
Thank you. I agree. I think it's a wonderful idea. I think it would be great to do something like that for them. in one of my many hats, I'm a race director for a race, and when we were looking at getting our medals for a race, that's not going to happen. But they were they were pretty far out as far as taking in orders and being able to put those through. So I don't know. That might be something to really look into and see how long it's going to take us to get the plaques made and such with all the restrictions right now. So.
And I think that she's going to start opening up a little bit after May 15th on some things. So hopefully some of these business will be able to go in and social distance by after May 15th. But so anyway, if this is something that we want to look at, if we can get a motion.
Do we have a motion to approve?
This is Board Member
Noreen
Coleman,
Scott.
and
Go ahead.
I move to approve having plaques done for the nominees.
Okay, motion by Board Member Coleman. And do I have a second?
Noreen Scott, I second.
Okay, and Noreen Scott with a second. Jane, can you take a roll call vote for us on this?
I will. Madam President Galbraith,
Yes.
Vice President Morgan,
Yes, I'm sorry. I got I muted and stumbled getting back. I'm sorry. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Secretary Scott,
Yes.
Board Member Cullen,
Yes.
Board Member Coleman.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Catherine, once again for thinking of that and for putting that together. It's very much appreciated. We want to make sure our students know that we love them and all the work that they do for these things. And it was hard on that one because we could only pick one, but they each were just outstanding students. So thank you for doing that. Really appreciate it.
President Galbraith, I'd like to just add one quick thing. I would suggest if the board is going to start doing plaques, that you get a couple of the board members together and you develop some criteria for it so that when one group of students gets it and another doesn't, that we have the criteria for why. For example, this is a board recognition. The board has voted to recognize these students. And so it just might, it's just a suggestion, but you might want to get a couple of together and just kind of develop the criteria for which you would do plaques. And then when they come up, we would kind of be alerted to that and say, do you want to recognize students for this particular thing because it's somewhat similar. So it's just something to think about for the board. But I think having some criteria would be a really good idea.
Kath, I don't know if we can create that here. I think we can. Catherine and Gwen, would you guys be willing to do that, to work together to come up with some criteria for plaques and recognition in the future?
I'm fine. I can, if I can stomach Catherine.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Absolutely. This is something that I've really believe in giving the recognition to our students. And so I'd be honored to be able to do that. Thank you.
Okay, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much once again. And thank you, Dr. Cleveland, for your input on that. That was definitely a good comment for us to think about. So we appreciate that. Okay, moving on to item D. We're going to review the 2020-2021 alternate budget, and Mike Baker is going to be our presenter for that.
Okay, Madam President, Dr. Cleveland, members of the school board. So what I want to do is just kind of walk you through just some of our thought processes on what we would be looking at in the event, as we know, is going to happen. We are going to be cut. Our budget's going to be cut. We just don't know how much. So the reason why we're bringing this now, we were going to wait about a week or so, is because we're kind of at a critical point right now in regard to opening up Joe Harris. And so that will be the next agenda item that we will be discussing. But if I may kind of walk you through this form or this format that Tracy kind of put together, and I think the format better depicts on the particular cuts and what happens to our revenue in the case that we're cut 5%, 10%, 15, 20, and 25%. And so those are the scenarios in front of us. So when you look at the form, Jane, can you blow that up a little bit? I don't know if everybody can see that clearly. So you'll see I think that's good. So you'll see up at the top what we've previously proposed to the school board was a balanced budget, and that balanced budget essentially included expenses of approximately 174 million out of operational, but it also had a total revenue of approximately 174 million. So up at the top, you'll see total expenses, 174, and then to the right, you will see that the SEG, our main revenue source, has the assumption of getting cut 5%, which would be approximately $146 million or total revenue of approximately $166 million. So if we scroll down the form a little bit, you will see the column to the left underneath total expenses is what are those items that we can cut in priority order in order to have the least effect on the operations of the district. And the first thing that would likely be cut, and maybe not even from us, but from the state, would be the 4% salary increase that the legislature approved. We also have what we call in the fiduciary department, we have unrestricted cash in the 1,000 fund, which is the instructional fund, and we also have $1 million in the support fund. And so what we would propose doing is taking our cash, and we put this cash aside in case we need to hire teachers, for example, or unexpected events come up during the year. And so our first proposal would be to take cash away from our unrestricted cash as well as our fiduciary account, and we would have a balanced budget, and it would we could still operate the district. So essentially, that is the format that you're looking at, and this would be a 5% cut. The format for a 10% cut is essentially the same. If Jane, if you can go there, but you will see that the list of things that would be cut would be more. So we would go deeper into the budget and we would cut other items in order to present a balanced budget. So again, when you look at the top right where it says total revenue, SEG would be cut by 10%, which would give us a little bit over $138 million. And that cut, what we would do, or that revenue, then we would move over onto the expenditure side and we would cut other items. And Jane, if you can please scroll down a little bit further. And so we would continue to cut as depicted on the form. And so as we would move from 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25% cuts, you can see essentially what our plan is. Jane, if you can move to the 15% folder, please. And if you can scroll down. So the 15% is as Dr. Cleveland said earlier, what we want to do is we want to avoid layoffs. And so with the 15% cut, because almost 90% of our budget is salary and benefits, once we start getting into larger cuts, it becomes essentially almost impossible not to cut personnel. So we get there right around the 15% mark. So the recommendation at 15% would be to cut 55 people. Now, at this point, we wouldn't really lay people off, but we would not hire the number of people, for example, that have recently retired or where we have openings. And we would not add to the allocations of the schools due to increased population. So at 15%, we would not have to physically lay people off, but we would not hire our vacancies with a number of exceptions. And those exceptions would be what we consider difficult positions to hire, such as math teachers, science teachers, nurses, counselors, and the like. All the other positions we would hold vacant, and we would use that money or the savings from that in order to balance the budget. Once we get over that 15% threshold, that's when we would actually have to look at layoffs or some type of reduction in force, whether it be individuals actually not working 40 hours but working less, or some type of situation where we could reduce the salary and benefit budget. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to provide kind of our thought processes on how we would go about cutting the budget when the state reduces the SEG for Rio Rancho, and we want to be prepared for that, obviously. At this point, I think I stand for questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. I'm actually always amazed how you come up with all of these numbers. So thank you so much for doing that. We'll start with Catherine Cullen if she has questions or comments that she would like to make on these.
So on the last scenario, we would, is that just to keep the 2% cash reserve? Mike?
No, what that would,
Or reduce it?
yeah, what we would do is there is a board policy
Right.
that we have 2% cash policy, cash reserve. So we would come to we would go to the school board in order to amend that policy.
And then use that 2% cash reserves towards it? Is that the scenario?
That's the scenario.
Okay. Sorry, can you see my face?
I can see your face. And if you think about it, I share your sentiment on this, but the reality of it is the reason why we have a cash reserve is for times like this. So the purpose of the cash reserve is that when there's a downturn in the economy and we're trying to provide the same services without layoffs or without reducing the level of services, we do rely on our cash reserves. So in this particular situation, really, this is one of the reasons why we set those funds aside.
No, and I agree with you there. However, I have a feeling this might be a lot longer time period than just one school year, and not having that reserve is my concern. Obviously, we're not there yet. We have no idea what they're going to cut, but that's, something when I see that we're looking at that's a concern.
I understand.
I'm trying to understand if our class size is going to be smaller, how are we going to operate with fewer teachers?
Well, what would happen is the class sizes would be incrementally larger. And so what's happened over the last few years, and it's very unfortunate, but during the Great Recession, is that our class sizes were larger because we did not have the funds to actually hire the amount of teachers in order to get the teacher-student ratio in line with
I've
state
lost
mandates. I'm sorry.
Say that again, Noreen.
I completely lost Mike's audio.
Oh, okay. He can go one more time.
Seriously.
Can you hear? Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Noreen, can you hear any of us right now?
And now, yes.
Okay,
Can
try
you
one
hear
more
me?
time. She's biased to you for some reason.
Yeah.
Do you hear Mike speaking to you, Noreen? Can you hear him at all? Can you still hear me?
I can now, yes.
All right, try one more time, Mike.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So under this scenario, actually, class sizes would actually get incrementally larger. So which obviously is very unfortunate because in the last few years we have been increasing our teacher staffing in order to get our student-teacher ratio in line with state mandates, and we finally reached that level. And so if the cuts are fairly drastic, then we're going to be going where we went before during the Great Recession, and that is class sizes would be larger. And so our student-teacher ratio would be a little bit above the state mandates.
Mike, I guess I just have to jump in here because I don't know if you maybe heard this morning what we're hearing from the secretary about that. They're not sure they're going to allow any waivers in class size because they worked very hard. So we are in a quandary. You know, what would we do? And so what might have to be the solution to this, because Mike's right. I mean, most of our money is tied up in personnel. So what are we going to do? There might have to be something related to social distancing, of which we lower the number of students at any one time in the building. And the only way you're able to do that is to connect up some way with technology and utilize that kind of approach where maybe you won't have everybody in the building. But they kind of echoed this morning that they're not into raising class sizes again because it took so long to get them down. But to Mike's point, there's really no solution out there on how you're going to avoid doing that. And the only other way you can do it is start cutting program. And we're talking about substantial kinds of programmatic cuts that I don't know that we would be able to even deliver the instructional program we're required to deliver. And so there are a lot of unknowns with that right now. But if you are in a pandemic, I think it's pretty clear that you're not going to move from putting 27 students in a classroom down to putting 32 in that classroom. And so it's my only point in bringing that up is that there may be different solutions than we've ever had before in terms of whether it's an AB schedule or whether it's a part day schedule or where you would not be able to have all those students in one classroom. But the state certainly signaled us this morning. They have real concerns about that. And they also have real concerns about taking people off the payroll and putting them on unemployment. But what we've got to know from the state is how are we going to pay for that? I mean, how would the state pay for that? So we agree with them in their
that was my question.
process.
I couldn't understand. I couldn't make.
But we don't know how to deal with that yet. And this is the only logical way at this point is to do it this way. So the state is in a conundrum just like we are about how that's going to look. But I do think that we may be looking at how we deliver instruction very differently next year than we have ever done before in order to be able to accomplish this.
Noreen's got
And
some
if,
more. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
yeah, if I may add to that, I mean, every day there's new news. And so Dr. Cleveland shared news with us this morning that it appears that we will get a direct appropriation from the federal government, potentially in the amount of $1.8 million, that will have significant impact upon these cuts as well. And so that direct appropriation is not included in this formula, only because we just found out about it today. And to add to that is we're kind of in a situation where this is kind of a moving target. But what I did want to present to you is just some of the things that we can do when we're faced with significant budget cuts. And certainly our classrooms would be the last place that we would want to have affected.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Noreen, did you have anything else you wanted to ask?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. Vice President Morgan, would you like to ask any questions or comments?
Not at this time. I'm still looking it over. So go ahead and ask one of the other board members.
Okay. Board Member Coleman.
Yes, this is Board Member Coleman. So, Mike, if I understand, if you can just clarify that, I mean, the minute we look at the first or the second scenario that you posted, that we are going to be dipping into our cash reserve, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So then the next question that I have was, not because I am as organized as Catherine is, but as I was going through some of my documents, I did come across the budget cuts, the flow chart from 2016, 2017, and how it could possibly impact that following year. And Dr. Cleveland and Mike, I don't know if you can speak to, are those areas that we're looking at to maybe address what we are possibly expecting?
Lynn, I'm a little confused about the question. Would you just restate it for me? Cut out for just a minute, and I lost your audio.
Sure. So I came across documents from the budget cuts in 2016, 2017, and some of the different things that the district was looking at that would impact the 7-18 school year.
Right.
And so what I just wanted to know is, there's a little bit more detail on the flow chart, and are those things that will kind of be reintroduced or kind of looked at as we, try and address this moving target?
Absolutely. I mean, I think just like in the past, everything will be looked at, and so we will put those things out. I don't have that list in front of me, and so I can't really respond to it. But certainly, we went through a really tough time, as you recall. Yeah. We're very much part of that, and
right.
And we were able to do some reductions. So I would say, we would, and unless the board gives us different direction, almost everything would be on the table to look at. Again, I have shared with you my priority, and my priority is keeping our people together if we can, and maintaining our staff as much as possible. But as Mike has said, every year we have people leave, we have people that move, we have people who retire, and there are always some opportunities there to look at expenditures. And the majority of our money is in personnel, any way you want to look at it. I mean, that's where the dollars are. But trying to do that without actually having to take people's jobs away and take their health insurance away, I think has always been a pretty high priority of our district. And so looking at every other thing that we can before we start getting into people is, I think, a pretty important priority. And that's always been the priority. The board has different priorities. We're certainly open to that. As you can see, we're cutting things like instructional materials, and we're one of the Yazzie Martinez districts that advocated for instructional materials to be paid for. But if you don't have the most basic things, then you have to start looking at what can you make do with, and what are your most essential expenditures. And so you would look at anything that is not part of the essential program.
Well, and I will send the flow chart that I have over to Jane. So it was just something that, like I said, I just came across. And I guess the last question is.
Well, I have it. I just don't have it in front of me. I do have it. I just don't have it in front of me.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. If you just let me know. Yeah. I guess then my next question would be if you can help me understand a little bit better how this. I'm just thinking calendar-wise. What I need to kind of get my head around is deadlines, things like that, everything moving. What is the hard and fast date that this needs to be approved? And what position does that put the board in to go ahead and get this done? And how do, I mean, I'm trying to figure out how I look at things now as a board member.
Yes.
To approve the budget.
Yeah, Madam President, Dr. Cleveland, members of the board. So we're just presenting this to you right now so that you have an understanding of what we are looking at in regard to potential future cuts. So recently we presented to the Finance Committee a balanced budget that I started off with basically saying, we know that this budget is not going to see the light of day. However, we are required by PED to submit a balanced budget according to the 2020-2021 legislative session. And so with that, we know that budget is going to need to be cut. And so in front of us today is these are our thought processes on how we would go about cutting that budget. But more importantly is really the next item. And because we're in a situation, the last few years, we have been growing as a district. Our financial situation has gotten better. And we are also opening up 2 new schools and potentially another program. And so the Joe Harris Elementary School, which we will be talking about next, is something that we do need to make a decision on, and we do need to make a decision on that very, very quickly. And that decision is wrapped up in the numbers in the budget.
I would just add one thing to that. We're passing the point of no return on Joe Harris. A decision has got to be made. We've redone all of our bus routes. We've done so many things. We're getting ready now to start staffing that school. So we have to have from the board a commitment, and that's the next agenda item, about opening Joe Harris. And we'll talk more about that when we get to that item. But this is how, and correct me, Mike, if I'm wrong, this is how we feel like we can open Joe Harris and survive financially as a school district. So that's the importance of this, is basically to tell you, we can do that. Is there some element of risk in it? Yes, there is. I mean, we're in tough financial times, but Mike's done a really nice job of laying out how believes that it can be done. But if we're not going to open Joe Harris, we've got to know that immediately, because everything is moving now to do that. And and one other thing I'll throw out there, if you don't use the money you put back for Joe Harris to open that school, then that money stays in the cash reserves. And should we get to a point where they are looking at cash reserves, they might lose that money. Because that money, and that's why we want to really put it aside and make sure we can protect it regardless. But it is important that we know one way or the other what we're going to do with Joe Harris. And I said, the next agenda item is more information. But Mike is showing you, hopefully, how he feels like we can, in fact, open that school.
Thanks, Dr. Cleveland. So I think for when, I mean, our deadline basically is May 11th for that first budget. That has to get in. And then we don't know until after they call that legislative session or like Chris was saying, you know, a 2-day sort of thing where they come in, and that will be sometime later. But I think that that's what we have, right? As far as a timeline of these different things before we can even really, we don't really have a timeline, but that's our best bet. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah, Madam President. Yes. So May 11th, we will be presenting our balanced budget, which is essentially, I hate to use the term, a kind of a phantom budget. And I think what is likely to occur in the future is that when the state cuts, depending on what happens to the economy, specifically what happens to the price of oil, we're going to be in a situation, I think, where we're going to be adjusting this budget throughout the year, and most likely not just 1 year, but multiple years.
Thank you for that. And I wanted to give Board Member Cullen, I know she had a question, a second to do that.
Thank you. This is Board Member Cullen. And thanks. I wasn't finished asking earlier before we had moved on. So that's okay. In reference to that 4% salary increase on all these examples, that is assuming that the state legislature will take back that 4%. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Without them holding it on. So we'd be looking at some difference if they require us to keep that 4% increase in there.
That's correct.
Fund.
Yeah,
So,
that's correct.
So these are really just some, what I call, well, it's better than a guesstimate, but it's kind of a guesstimate right now until we start hearing from them.
Well, we have to make decisions on the best information that is available us to today.
Mm-hmm.
So we think it's likely that they will cut the 4%. As Dr. Cleveland said earlier, the union's trying to hold on to a portion of that. So we really do not know, but we know that there's a lot of pressure on the legislature at this point, likely to cut that 4%. So this is our best estimate of what will happen in the future. And some of these things will occur and some will not, and then we will adjust as we get more information.
And that 5%, when we did the minus on that to come up with these figures, that included that 4% in that 5% cut. Does that make sense? Sorry, that's a little confusing, but that means you're running it. Okay, perfect. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? You're good, Board Member Cullen? Okay. And my my little mic bar comes up over people's faces, so I can't always see you all. Okay, I would like to move on to the next item unless there's anyone that wants to talk any more about what we just went over. These items go together, as Dr. Cleveland and Mr. Baker were both trying to let us know. And so if everyone is good, just raise your hand in your picture if you have anything else you'd like to add to this before we move on to the second part of this. Okay, go ahead, Mike Baker, you can continue on with that next item, E.
Okay, Madam President, Dr. Cleveland, members of the school board. So as I was talking about earlier, we are on the eve of opening up Joe Harris Elementary School, Shining Star Preschool as well. Shining Star Preschool, for the most part, is we have one school. The school will be relocated. So the actual cost of opening up that school essentially will be a wash. And so that being said, Joe Harris Elementary School, we will see a change in our budget because it's a new school. We're going to have utility costs. We're going to have maintenance costs as time goes on, and just supplying that school in regard to teachers, EAs, administrators, we will see a fairly significant increase in our expenditures in order to operate that school. And because we have been working on this for many, many years, and we've spent recently over $30 million putting this school together as far as building it, we believe that we need to occupy it. So although we may have to change the way we possibly do business in our other schools, what will be a positive will be reducing the amount of students at the elementary schools, which will help a number of elementary schools in that particular region of the city. We do believe with the pending budget cuts is that we can open up Joe Harris Elementary School, and if we decide not to do that, we still have to provide, we're still going to have utility costs and other costs. The only thing that we would save essentially would be personnel costs. So in order to move forward with opening up Joe Harris Elementary School, we are requesting that the school board either approve or deny the opening of that school, because we need to be in a position where we need to hire teachers, we need to hire administrators in order to staff that school when we go back to school, whether it be in August or September or whatever date the state or the district decides to start school. And so we are asking that the school board take a look at this time, simply because time is running out, and we either need to go in one direction or the other. But I believe that given the environment in regard to the federal government actually giving us funds, whether it be a direct appropriation or indirect appropriation through the state, that the fiscal impact to us this year should not be that great. It may actually be greater next year. And as Dr. Cleveland said earlier, one of my fears is that we have been setting money aside in our cash reserves in order to lessen the fiscal impact in any one fiscal year when we were at this position to open up Joe Harris Elementary School. So we're kind of in a position where we need to move forward, or we don't need to move at all. But if we don't spend the money on Joe Harris Elementary School, that money would go back into our cash reserves for a future opening, and we do risk the state's opportunity to come and sweep that cash. So at this time, I stand for questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Baker. Real quick, I'd like Dr. Cleveland, I know she has a lot on this too. I'd just like to kind of hear some of your comments, and then we'll take questions and comments from the board based off of kind of both.
Okay, Mike said most of it. I think the community's waited a really long time for this school. The school is an emotional issue as well as a financial one for the community of Rio Rancho. And we've waited an awfully long time to open it. And I think it is important to this community to try to open that school. I think there are other issues of what if you don't open it? How are you going to protect that $30 million building? How are you going to keep it from being vandalized? How are you going to keep, and any building that sits empty, it's not a good thing. I mean, it gets dirty, whatever. And so if you don't open it, what happens to that building out there? The other most important issue is that those elementaries, as Mike said, sitting on the south end are close to 1,000 kids. And so they're way above where they should be. One of the advantages too in opening the building is it will lower the enrollment and it will make social distancing and the whatever requirements we have from the state. It's going to make it a whole lot easier to do when we lower those numbers in those other schools. So it will help somewhat with that. The other is there's always a way to raise additional revenue. We have to be really careful if we do that, but that's going to be a beautiful school, and I think we may be able to have some additional students come in that would raise the revenue for that building. You have to be very careful because if you go more than the staffing costs, it isn't an addition. But if you are careful, growing enrollment will help pay for that building. And so certainly looking at how we might be able to invite some additional students into the building and offset some of the costs. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Mike mentioned the whole issue of setting that money aside and saying that's what we were going to use it for, and then not doing that. I think raises some questions from perhaps the state about the legitimacy of that. And so I think, you look at the pluses and you look at the minuses, but it almost seems like we've just got to find a way to do that. We are already, in staffing adjustments. They've already reworked all the bus routes. They could be reworked again, absolutely. But it would take a lot of time and effort. I think people have mentally now made the adjustment to the moves, and it will be very hard to take steps back in the community itself. So, our hope is to open the building. I don't see that 1 year from now it's going to be any better. It's probably going to be worse. So the reality, if we don't open it now, it's probably going to be 2 years before we can open it. That building would sit empty, and the taxpayers have paid for that building, and I think they're really hoping to see it open. I know many of you are really hoping to see that building open, and so I keep trying to separate my brain part of it from my heart part of it, but I can tell you very definitely, in terms of my heart, I really hope that the mental side of it, that we can show and that Mike has done that we can manage to move forward with it. That being said, I want to be really honest with you. It is going to be hard. And yes, there will be some cuts other places and other schools to make this happen. But we've done that over the years as we open new schools. And my last comment is $30 million just is amazing to me. It's a beautiful building. That's almost what Rio Rancho High School costs. It just shows you how the cost of buildings have gone up. And so, having waited later to do a construction of this building, it would have probably cost even more. We've certainly seen the cost of this building go up over the years we've had to wait. So certainly my hope is that we can find a way to open it. But definitely it is a challenge given where we are right now. And no one could have predicted where we are right now with the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Cleveland. I appreciate those remarks. We're going to go through the board. I'm going to start with Secretary Scott, if she'd like to raise any questions, comments.
I've already gone on. Yeah, I've already gone on record. I think we absolutely have no choice but to open Joe Harris. I have worked on the bond elections, probably the last 6 bond elections. And there's just no way that we could let a building sit for 2 years and not expect dramatic damage to be done. So I firmly think we need to open it.
All right. Thank you, Secretary Scott. Vice President Morgan, would you like to add anything?
I wasn't around when all of this started, but, whenever we get a chance to improve our education for our kids, it almost makes sense to make that move. Like I said, I don't have all the details. I was sitting here trying to think what would be the reason to not open the school. I mean, Dr. Cleveland touched a little bit on it about it's going to pull from other schools and from other budgets. But yeah, I think we need to move forward to make this. I mean, she talked a lot about the 30 million to build the building and some of the other costs, and to let something like that just sit wouldn't make sense to me. So I'm like Noreen, let's move forward and get the school open.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I couldn't get my mic. Thank you, Vice President Morgan. Board Member Coleman, would you like to give some comments or questions?
I have some questions. I in no way want this to look like I am going either direction, but I did just, I needed, first of all, what I would have hoped to see in our agenda was the cost that we're kind of talking about. So Mike, could you go ahead, could you tell me the additional expense that we're looking at to open Joe Harris? I mean, I know that hopefully you have that number pretty close. So can you tell me what we'd be looking at this year?
Let me, if I may, kind of move over to my computer here. The personnel cost, or the cost savings, would be approximately 1.4 million. So if we were not to open up the school, we would save that approximately that amount of money in salary.
Okay. So there's a couple of things that I just kind of wonder about, and maybe ideas or some time for discussion is, Dr. Cleveland, could you answer for me why, if we don't open in the fall, the building will sit there empty for 2 years?
My comment about why it will be 2 years instead of 1 that we wait is because of all of the projections. We have heard from the secretary, we have heard from the chairman of Senate Finance, we have heard from from almost every source that we will have greater reductions the following year. And so, this year is expected to be better than next year. And so next year, the district will have less money to spend than it will have this fall. So that will make it doubly difficult to open a school. And we're anticipating some additional reduction the following year, unless the state economy picks up and we recover faster than what they are predicting. But that prediction of it will be worse 2 years from now comes directly from Secretary Stewart. It comes directly from Senator John Arthur Smith.
Okay. So what is the pros and cons to opening it mid-year? Because here's what I wonder is we don't know what's going to happen in the fall. My other concern and area that I think we should really consider is, since this is an elementary school, do we run a bigger chance of those grades being homeschooled impact our enrollment? So I wanted to open that up for discussion.
We have opened one elementary school mid-year. It was several years ago. It was Puesta del Sol. It was probably the worst experience we've ever had in the school district in terms of opening in the middle of a year. And so you have very difficult time. If you leave the teachers in their home schools now, say at MLK or at Maggie Cordova or wherever they are, then you move those children in the middle of the year and you give them a brand new teacher and brand new classmates, and they have to leave their school and they leave their classes. And so it's also very difficult to move staff in the middle of the year from one building to another. But you will disrupt every class in every one of those schools the teachers are coming from. So my feeling is you either need to open it in the fall or you need to open it in a year from now or 2 years from now. When we opened Puesta, it was really a challenge, and we didn't have that piece at all. We were moving from the old St. Thomas Aquinas, the old Puesta, over. So it would be like, like moving Shining Stars mid-year, much less difficult. And even that was really terrible challenge. It's almost impossible to move in the middle of the year. because you will
Okay.
disrupt every classroom in every school where kids and teachers are coming from. So that's why I would strongly not recommend moving mid-year.
Okay.
Yeah. And,
Thanks.
and member Coleman, as you were saying that, I was like, that's a really good thought. But as I was thinking about it, and I think it was a good thing to raise, I think a lot of our students have a lot more anxiety than even when we were young. There's just a lot of anxiety out there with our students. And I think moving them mid-year, and I'm thinking of my own kids especially, I just have one left in elementary school. When I think of the anxiety that she would have having to move schools, I think that would be really difficult. But I appreciate you bringing it up, because I think that is a good thought to think of some other options that we can do. Would you have some other things you would like to say?
No, that just covered it. I just wanted to bring those up for discussion and just to make sure we're covering just looking at all different angles.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm going to go to Catherine Cullen real quick, and then I know that there's probably a lot of others that have more thoughts, so we'll kind of work our way back around after Catherine speaks to us.
Thank you. This is Board Member Cullen. I'll tell you, this gives me more anxiety than anything. I know that so many people are like, let's get this done, but this gives me really a tremendous amount of anxiety, especially when we're looking at, like I have said, it's not within this year. We're just going to be looking at this for the next couple of years, of that we're going to be taking a hit to our budget. And so this is really difficult for me. And I was thinking, Dr. Cleveland, since I've been on the board, I can't tell how many times we've talked about Joe Harris Elementary on the 7 years that I've been on here. I mean, this is a school that's gone through so much and several bond cycles. And I tell you, and then here we are again talking about, can we open it after we've built it? So that's a big part of my anxiety on this one. But Mike, I was wondering, when we're talking about it will relieve the burden on these other elementary schools, but financially, what kind of burden are we going to be looking at the other elementary schools opening this, because it could be tight in the next couple of years?
Mike, you want to answer that, or you want?
Yeah.
I can.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Cleveland.
Well, I think what you're looking at is, it could be tighter in terms of supplies and materials. It could be tighter in terms of instructional materials that we have. It might mean that some of the other schools, as we open the media center for this one, may have to wait a year or two for some additional materials. So, there's just some small things that might tighten up. We've got most of those expenditures already built in to the opening expenses of the money that we put aside. So money for the media center, whatever, we've already put money in for that. But if it's tight, we just tighten up across. That means just a little bit less money, and not just elementary schools. I mean, over the years when we've opened new schools, what we've done is we've tightened up budgets in all areas in order to open a school. And if we hadn't done that, I guess we would not have opened 50% of the schools that we had, as when we were growing so fast. But it's a lot of things. It's a little bit here and a little bit there, but supplies, materials, instructional materials, there would be other things that might be less. We might not be replacing things in other schools as quickly, small equipment and some other things. So every school is impacted when you open a new school. It's how it's generally been historically. But I think it's going to do irreparable damage to other schools? No, I really don't think that's the case. Mike, do you want to add anything to that? That's kind of the feedback you've given me.
Yeah, I just want to, again, echo what you just said. And so in order to, again, to reiterate what I've said in the recently, is that we have been putting money aside in order to pay for a lot of those one-time costs. It's the personnel costs that we will be not only paying for now, but into the future. The impact will be much less as we spread it across the district, not just at school sites, but also the department districts as well. And so what that means, for example, if we have to tighten our belt, so to speak, that means that there'll be less construction jobs. less projects that we will have to get done, potentially less computers that we can purchase, and those type of things. We try to spread that across the district in order to fund this school and to get a better balance as far as how many kids are in each of the elementary schools.
And our enrollment is still flat across the district and probably in any projections within the next year or so.
I don't think you can project growth at this point. The only way you would project growth at right now would be to open up for enrollment at Joe Harris. And I think that's very, very reasonable to assume that if we were to open that school up for some additional growth, that we would get some students to do that. We've made some, overtures to, just to see if there was any interest at Russ Medical Center, to see if any of them, being so close to that school, might have an interest. And Beth has talked with Angela about that and said, yes, there really might be some interest in putting their children very close to them. And so it would, there's that possibility of opening it up and growing enrollment, which grows revenue, which spreads across the school. So there are some ways to look at growing that, but we've not done that the last several years because our schools are so crowded. And you would remember that actually we did have students leave Maggie Cordova in order to try to bring the enrollment down at that particular site.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I want to go around one more time. Noreen, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I think for the sake of moving things along, I'd like to make a motion that we open Joe Harris on time.
Okay, we do have a motion, but is there any more discussion that needs to take place from anyone? So there is a motion on the floor. Wynn Coleman, please go ahead. You're muted. I can't get you. You're okay? Okay. Any other discussion before I ask for a second? Okay.
I'll second.
We have a second by Jeffrey Morgan. So, Jane, I'm going to ask you to do a roll call vote on this for a yes to open and a no to not open the school.
Okay. Madam President Galbraith,
Yes.
Vice President Morgan,
Yes.
Secretary Scott,
Yes.
Board Member Cullen,
Yes.
Board Member Coleman.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, for doing that. And as I even said yes, I felt a lot of anxiety, and I think each of us feels that. Yeah. There's a lot of anxiety, and it's not because it's not a good thing. It is a good thing, and I was really trying to listen to everyone. It is a good thing, but it is just like we were talking with the budget. It is a moving target, and we don't know. And so, we talk about teachers and not wanting to lay teachers off, and so it worries me to open a school, but I do feel that it really is the right thing, and I can see some heads nodding and out there too. And so I want to express that we do feel that anxiety as we go through that. But I hope that the state can get together and to start giving us some good numbers so we can see what we're working with. Before we close up, is there any other comments? I know that we just voted on that, but I just kind of want to make sure there's no other comments on it.
No.
Okay.
First time to open a school.
I know. And I want to say thank you to the district for bringing this back to us. I don't know all the different restrictions, but I know that this was something that we were going through with, and to bring it back just so that we could discuss it shows that, even on the district side, I know that you believe that we should open it as well, but that we are all concerned for the future on these things. So thank you for bringing this back to the board. Dr. Cleveland, do you have any last comments?
No, I would say we're spreading our anxiety around a little bit. But certainly it is, you look at the pros and cons, and it does seem to be important that we move forward. And I think this community will be very appreciative of that. And we will find a way to make it work. So it is exciting to open a new school. I'm trying to visualize how we'll do that with social distancing and all of those other things. It'll be a little bit different maybe than what we've done in the past. But thank you for taking the time to rethink this and talk about it. I think it's a very important issue. One last comment we didn't mention, but I think is an important one, and I know a couple of you have mentioned it previously, is the role that the opening of that new school will hopefully have on our city's economy and future. And so hopefully this will be a catalyst for good things that will continue to happen in our community. But it is uncertain times that we're living in, that's for sure.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Cleveland, and thank you for all who presented and all who were here today. Just for advanced planning, we have coming up our Finance Committee meeting on May 11th. That will be virtual. We have our regular board meeting that will be that same day, May 11th. That will also be held virtually. And this meeting is adjourned. So thank you all so much for coming out.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks, Jane. I just wanted to say